Everybody, good morning, good evening, depending where you are in the world. Very pleased to have you all here with us today. We have customers from North America, Central America, South America, Europe, and Asia with us. So welcome to you all. This is the session we have briefed you about, best practices, lessons learned, overcoming challenges in your programs using Infor Risk Compliance, formerly known as Approva BizRights. And this came up from a lot of requests from you looking for guidance and things you can do yourselves to drive more value and other things that address some of the challenges you've shared with us. This is a 60-minute webcast. We have a lot of information to share. If you have to get off before 60 minutes, we will share the recording with you as well. As you go through, this is all about organizations that are using the technology, using the processes, so expecting some fairly insightful questions. Hopefully we can give you some insightful answers. So please do ask questions as we go through. If you look at your GoToWebinar panel, there is a place to ask questions, so please enter your questions there as you think of them. If you have any technical issues, you can use the same mechanics and someone will help you with that. So, so that's what we're here for. My name is Dan French. I'm founder and CEO at Consider Solutions. I know many of you, been around here for a long time. I'm very pleased to be joined by Hans van Ness, who's our COO. Welcome, Hans.
Hello, Dan.
Now, somebody said these two faces look like face of experience, and when I wasn't looking or in hearing range, they said actually you just look like two very old guys. We do have a lot of experience in this. We've been working in this particular domain around the finance processes, risk, financial control and compliance for 13 or 14 years, and specifically with this technology, the Approva IRC technology. But fortunately for you, much of the expertise we're sharing comes from a much younger, more vibrant group of people working with you on your day-to-day business. So that's us. In terms of context, this is the way we view the world. We see governance, risk and compliance as a dimension in our view of world-class finance, which we see as helping the organization drive business results, reduce cost of finance, optimize cash flow, and have better risk management. And the pillars on the right really represent the kind of the practices of work we undertake. So financial control and compliance, risk assurance, the broader risk assurance beyond SOX, ICFR kind of risk and controls, such as anti-bribery and corruption, fraud, error, waste, and other such things. On the right-hand side, the finance process optimization, all underpinned by IT and ERP enablement. And obviously, if you're looking at this from an IRC or Approva point of view, most of you are looking at this from the intersection between financial control and compliance and ERP enablement, and some of you, broader risk assurance and indeed process optimization. And the people who inform our experience and that of the team are you on this call. So many of these organizations around the world are on the call today, and many others. So this is where we get, so a lot of these ideas aren't ours really. We're just replaying back to you what we are learning and what we're sharing with customers around the world. So this is the agenda. Introduce ourselves. I want to start with feeding back to you what you've told us. We did a survey for many of you. Those of you who have registered in the past 2 or 3 days, you probably didn't get the survey because it was too short notice, but many of you have responded to that survey, and other customers who aren't even here have responded to the survey. I'm going to share successes and challenges which frame a lot of the responses. We're going to look at 4 big value themes, how to categorize these big issues, and then we're going to share with you 15 specific recommendations that you can do to address these issues. I'm going to give you a brief update on the Approva Infor Risk and Compliance technology. Although this is not designed to be a roadmap update, we have all that information. We share that with you if you so wish. Considerations for a deeper dive, conclusions, and Q&A. So do ask the questions so we can give you the A. Okay, we did this survey. You told us a lot of things. There were 3 questions. One of the questions was, where's been your biggest successes in implementing the processes around Infor Risk and Compliance and Approva? And you can see some good examples here. Many of you are on the call. There's issues there about scale, scope and scale, and implementing a global process. A lot of impact on SOX and integration. Now, that's all fine, and it's nice to see those things. But really, why you're here is to deal with the flip side of that. What are the challenges that you've yet to overcome? And these are some of the responses we got. Everything from technical issues. How do we make sure we can benefit from the promised audit effectiveness we get from a better controls monitoring tool? And what do we have to do to make sure we reduce the cost and effort of our audit process? How do we really design an effective workflow for joiners, movers, leavers, and delegation activities? The issue of reporting is big for many. Expectations have changed. And, what do we do now? Skills, knowledge, the shifting sands of ERP and technology strategy is an important topic for many of you. Also, there's a growing plethora of applications in the space of governance, risk, control, and assurance for many of you. And how do you deal with that? And obviously, there's a lot of marketing stuff to deal with. I have to report back to management on what these things mean. And analytics is a big topic, and what's the substance and what's the style. Some other challenges, we won't go through all of these because we're going to deal with these in the responses, but number of obvious things here. Embedding a tool or a process in a complex global business is not trivial, whatever the tool is. Risk ownership. Is this the best tool for the job? Perhaps we've had it for 10 years, and is it still the right thing? And also, those of you who have operations in Europe, you will probably be aware there's the European General Data Protection Act is coming in, which has impact on personal data, so that affects most of you on this call in one way or another. So these are all questions that have come up. So as we look at all this, trying to sort of put some sense to it all and some structure, we have noticed kind of themes that affect us and affect you over the past few years. There's been a big shift since the early days of Sarbanes-Oxley, when it was all about controls, and you've got to make sure you've got the right controls, and you've got to have mitigating controls and all this good stuff. And it's true that a lot of organizations lost the, in fact, even we did, we lost the view, or lost the perspective that controls are only a mechanism to manage risk. They're a form of policy which help you mitigate risk. And so now we're much clearer now about the link between risk, policy, and control. But there is a paradox. If you get too focused on control, sometimes you have too many controls that aren't really managing any risk at all. And then the whole issue about managing fact versus managing judgment. How do we get as much fact as possible in the debate so we can report things we know to be true rather than just attestations? And then monitoring tools like Approva and the other GRC tools, are they more burden than value or more value than burden? And how do we make sure we help that balance? And the business reality as well is, I talked about our context, about world-class finance view, but more and more of the organizations we work with are taking a much more end-to-end view. The landscape's getting more complex, not less. The businesses are changing. Many of your businesses are changing substantially, changing business models, changing both the product sets, the way you distribute as a business. The technology, when we started all this, most organizations believed the answer was to have one big ERP from one of the big names and use that as a dominant system in the organization. The view now seems to be ERPs are very, very complex, and the core ERP is very clearly important, but it's primarily the hub now, and around that there are spokes of other applications which might be cloud-enabled, process-specific, or just niche applications that are best for the job. And this paradigm from a compliance focus, control and compliance, to an enterprise risk focus. So all these things are happening. So in addition to the specific challenges, we've also got to work through, navigate these changes. So, and a lot of this has come from you, so I'm sure you're going to echo that. Another perspective is also where we're focusing our effort as an organization. This is a view from KPMG, but it could come from anyone really. It's a focus of effort and cost in the finance function. And if you go back to the Sarbanes-Oxley days, we had massive effort in financial controls, ridiculous effort in fact. But we've optimized and simplified and standardized a lot of that now, and we've automated it, of course. And so the relative cost of that has gone down. Financial operations themselves, we've simplified, standardized, automated, we've implemented shared services, and financial operations cost has gone way down as well. So if we look now at our current, where we are today, we're looking very much now, all of us, we're having to balance managing risk, genuine business risk, and driving value of performance. So that's really the the thought of the day, I guess. And of course, again, even in a few short years, our businesses are pretty much all global now. It's not that they weren't globally spanning before, it's just the processes are global as well. So we might have vendors in Australia, we might raise orders in South America for goods to be delivered in Houston, Texas, and invoicing, payment, and settlement all done in a shared service center in Krakow. Now that's great, and it's a massive transformation for the organization, but it adds complexity in that no single person has line of sight over that process execution anymore. And that's been enabled by integrated business processes, global process ownership, shared services, and our ERP. In the top left, you see that despite all this investment we've made, organizations are still losing a lot of value, not just to fraud, but to waste and error every year. And the ACFE have been doing a survey every year for as long as I can remember, and that percentage of 5% hasn't gone down at all. In fact, last year it went up to 6.7%. So it's going up, not going down. And then bottom left, you see some of the examples where we're losing out. And of course, the big point in the bottom cartoon is, error is still a big point. So any ways we can eliminate error are important. So RPA and robotics have an element of that, eliminating transpositions of data. But still, we come around the bottom right that you'd think that all this is about reducing cost of compliance and cost of audit, and that isn't happening anytime soon. So we know we've got some challenges. Fundamentally, we're all in organizations. I think pretty much every one of you now is working with a shared services business model, certainly for all the financial accounting processes. And it's more than just standardizing and simplifying those transaction services, but getting efficiency and effectiveness beyond those, which leads us to the global process ownership discussion. That is probably the single biggest organizational and process-oriented change we've seen about how to get, or perhaps get back to, end-to-end accountability and line of sight. So people who genuinely own the whole source-to-pay process, from demand, sourcing, vendors, through order creation, receipt, invoicing, settlement, and customers and supplier satisfaction. Robotics and AI, we've got lots of new technology. They're on the march, but of course that's wonderful, creates opportunities for us, but from our perspective we also have to think that not all transactions are created equal. What does a robotically created transaction mean from a controls point of view? Do you need to apply the same segregation duties across it, or different? What about AI? How do you know what the rules are that created the data? Then the drive for analytics, we've been talking about this for years. I think the analysts have been talking about it for years. Now it's the time to just do it. And as I said earlier, the tectonic technology shifts, which is difficult to say, and the changes in ERP systems. So all that's wonderful. So you might feel in your organization and your role, you might feel that you need to be this superhero in the Clash of Titans, but then you look at the technologies available to you and you might think it's you don't quite have your battle sword quite at the level you might want it to be. And I'm trying to be polite. So I want to talk to you now about the 4 big value themes. I'm going to ask Hans to talk about these, but I will remind you, please ask questions in the panel. Even things we haven't even talked about yet, get them down while you think of them. So I'm going to pass over to Hans to talk us about the big themes.
Thanks, Dan. Yes, we listen to your successes, your challenges. We have our own observations, then introduce some of the meta changes that are prominent in the world we live today. And we guys like a bit of structure, so we tried to structure where to look for improvements with what you're doing today with your Infor Risk and Compliance into 4 big value themes. We depict them as a circle here. We started at 9 o'clock. You could look at improving your business alignment, making sure that you are doing the right things for the right people, and keep in line with that. And then, of course, make sure that you, in the second quarter, address the risks that are important to the organization with the right respect for the risk, looking at both the chance of occurrence and the impact of the potential risk. And when you transfer that into an operational situation, you have to make sure that your business as usual is as effective as possible. And last but not least, that you do that in a balanced way so that the value of your operation is in line with the costs of executing that operation. We will go into the themes one by one, a bit deeper. So the first theme being improving your business alignment, essentially making sure that you deliver the right value to your stakeholders. So make sure that you align with your business direction, with your regulatory context, that you know how global processes are impacting what you're doing today, but also especially tomorrow, because as Dan told us, the only constant is change, and your organization will change, and you have to change with it to be able to deliver the value. You see the key elements to the left here, and with each key element we mention a few objects that you could think of, a few topics that you could think of in this context, and that might of course differ per organization. So if you're in healthcare, HIPAA might be relevant. If you are in another area, it might not. The second theme is the enhancing of your risk management. As I said, address the right risk, and with I wouldn't only say address the right risk, but also address the right actions when you have seen those risks happening. Anything from your linking with enterprise risk via making sure that your risk assessment is factual, up to the reporting of your risk to all your stakeholders in various formats and aggregations. And of course, make sure that you, if you have seen a risk, that you both address that individual risk and if it has any systemic impact, to change your process. The third quarter, improve business as usual. Sounds so easy, but make sure that you deliver what you promise, that you have a view on your end-to-end process. You know exactly who is doing what with what authority, that you have the right skills, also with some contingency in mind, and that you apply the best practices. Yes, technology is a piece of that, but business as usual is as much a process optimization issue as it is a technology optimization issue. And the last element is make sure that your total cost of ownership is in line with the value that you deliver. And you have to look a bit wider than just what you would obviously think of the cost of maintaining your hardware infrastructure for IRC and your software. It is the whole ecosystem around it. Who is involved? Maybe your local gatekeepers that look at violations, maybe external support, and maybe your auditors who are asking you also to make costs in reporting to them what you're doing and how you are doing it.
Thanks very much, Hans. Those four key value themes are the four buckets in which every one of the challenges you raise to us in these surveys fall into. So we created the four categories, those four themes, but those themes are basically encompass all of the issues you raised. So they're important four topics. I'd also like to add, just as we get into the recommendations, which all fit into those four topics, that obviously you're all here as Approva IRC users, but many of you also use other tools as well. Some of you use SAP GRC as well as Approva. Some of you use some other GRC tools. Some of you use risk management tools. A lot of these recommendations, some are technologically very specific. Some you could apply to your whole GRC landscape. So have a think about that, because not all of these things are necessarily absolutely specific to Approva. So 15 specific recommendations coming out of the challenges we saw, and to be fair, there are a few more that we could come to, but there's a limited time we have. If as we go through these, a particular challenge, particular recommendation that bothers you isn't there, get a question in through the panel, email us, we will do our best to help you. We're determined to get information out to help you all, and you know, information's free, right? So at least having a few brains think about things is a good idea. So what we've done with these recommendations is have a think about the specifics from our experience and frankly from your experiences across the world, but also look at things you can do yourself just with access to free resources we have or are available generally that you can just apply yourself with some smart judgment. Those places you might want a helping hand, and those places where you actually might want to outsource a piece of the work. But you'll see how we're looking at that. And here's a little summary. Here are the 15 on the left. You don't need to read them in great detail because I'm going to come back to them individually. But as you can see, there's a big bunch of them you can do yourself. A bunch where you probably could do with, or some options where you can have a helping hand, and those options we might want to do some selective sourcing. So that's what we're going to talk about now, very specific recommendations. We're going to go through them one by one, but of necessity, we're going to be pretty quick on all of them. Every one of them has backup materials. If it's relevant to you, you can ask us for and you get hold of that stuff. Or if you want more insight, you want to ask questions about it, do that either through the panel or by email. As I say, a lot of these issues have been hanging around for a long while and we'd like to help you solve them quickly. So with that in mind, I'm going to, Hans and I are going to take turns in this, so I'm going to start with Hans. Here's a popular one.
Here's a popular one, yeah. Comments that we heard quite a lot. It's so difficult to organize a training to get all our people in the same room at the same time, away from their daily work. Well, we listened to that, and for that reason, we have created a complete curriculum of web-based, on-demand training modules that can be taken as a group, can be taken individually, and that should be able to serve your training needs and your skill refreshing needs more practical than in the past. If you see down below, we have earmarked the specific recommendations as playing a role in the 4 themes that we discussed before. And in this case, for training, it makes it obvious that it plays an improvement role in both business as usual and the total cost of ownership. How do we do that training? As I said, on-demand, modular, delivered through WebEx and recorded for your later review. So if you have to switch to your urgent business, you can review it later. The nice thing, it is combining training material with live interaction with the experts who are delivering the modules. So you can ask your specific questions if they differ a bit from the standard click-through activities and get into meaningful conversations. We address the knowledge backlog, especially if you have a changing team. We make your resources more effective, etc. So we deliver this as just enough, just in time, and just for you. Second one, many organizations have more than one tool that they use in their GRC landscape. Sometimes 2, we have seen situations of over 10. And that can be quite complex because then you get questions, please, can you give us IRC data in such an aggregated form that we can share it with that tool? Or that tool says something different about, I think, the same topic, etc. To address that, you could harmonize your GRC-tool landscape, and what is depicted here is a summary traffic signal overview of an organization that is using 4 tools. Approva for the controls monitoring, ACL for audit analytics, SOX reporting via SharePoint, and some metric stream for audit management. And the colors depict if we are satisfied that what we're doing there is what we need, if we need some action, or we think there is some attention required, which is quite different. And to the left you see the way how we approach that, and it depicts it refers to the Pentagon image to the right, where we have in 9 segments listed the elements whereby you can objectively compare those tools. You can do that yourself. We can deliver you that Pentagon with some underlying material. You can ask us to facilitate that. What you will find is probably more legacy processes than you were aware of, some unknown ownership, and absolutely some overlap. And what the result is that you see the potential to have at least a common topology, so that you know when one environment talks about a risk, that's the same thing in another environment. It gives you an option to harmonize. Maybe there is a tool in there that you don't need, so less tools could mean less costs.
Thanks, Hans. That's the first two specific recommendations. So the third one, in no particular order, is the issue of risk management as it relates to your rules in Approva, or indeed any other GRC tool. Now, in the old days, 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, when people used to take the rules, the standard rules delivered with Approva or any other tool, and use them as their rule set. Now, most organizations are much more aware that they need to validate rules and risks against their own organization, their own business, their own systems, and their own organizational structure. So now, general best practice is you want to be looking at reviewing your risks every couple of years. So there's a bunch of tools here in terms of a process flow, some heat maps, and an end-to-end process mapping tool, which allow you to be able to run workshops with your stakeholders and assess the key risks by process, and then map them back to the rules you have in Approva or any other tool. So you can do some self-assessments. So you need some workshop management facilitation skills. You understand a basis of the core risks. You get the stakeholders together, identify risks of priority, then use that to map to business processes and down to the rules in your Approva implementation. And the good news about that is not only does it ensure that your SOD, for example, or other process control rules are relevant, it re-engages stakeholders so that everybody is agreed what the high priority risks are, which I know for some of you is a bit of a challenge. And also it means that the violation and exception reports you produce are relevant and are going to people who understand that the risks are valid and they need to take action. The alternative to that, of course, is many of the challenges of having reports to stakeholders who don't understand what they mean or whether they should even bother to take action. So that's a really important point, and we're seeing more and more of that, and you can do that yourself. We're helping a number of organizations with that also. Another point that comes up a lot is, again, one of the sort of marketing themes behind continuous monitoring tools is reduce the cost of your of audit and assurance. Now, clearly, when you're moving from doing sample-based testing or detailed testing around the world, and you're moving to a continuous monitoring environment and centralized location, it makes sense that you should be able to ask your auditors to monitor the process of the controls monitoring, as in Approva, rather than have to do substantive individual testing instead at all the regional locations, with all the obvious cost reduction and efficiency improvements. Now that's great as a promise, but you do actually have to do some things to make sure that works. So we've discussed this with many of you. We've put together the Audit Readiness Guide. This helps you with all of the processes and expectations that your auditor would require for them to regard your Approva implementation, or indeed any other tool implementation, as a control that they can rely on. At the management testing, they can say, yes, we'll accept that as given. Some of the challenges that some organizations are having is because they haven't done this, the auditors are looking at their Approva implementation and saying, well, we're going to do the detailed testing anyway. Now, obviously, that takes time and money for the organization, but it comes back to you also with kind of different results than you had, and you have to pick the bones out of that. So the Audit Readiness Guide is really, really useful. It's free of charge, doesn't cost you anything. We've put the effort in basically collating your own feedback and our observations. You can self-assess your readiness, you can put in place some actions to make it better, and you can share that with your auditor and use that as a basis for saying you don't need to do substantive testing anymore. So that's really powerful. If that's a concern of yours, ask us, we'll send you the thing, and it's that's a 5-minute exercise. So that will be hopefully that'll be useful to many of you. So now, Hans?
Yeah, I would start with a question. Who is doing what in your organization? And I put this question forward because in many of the conversations that we have with our customers, at some point this question comes up. And to give a clear answer, who is doing what and why and how, is sometimes not easy. And for that, we have developed a few end-to-end process mapping opportunities and documents that can be used. This is an example of an access control end-to-end process. So beginning from the moment an employee or a temp staff member is coming in the organization until they leave, and who is involved with the access control elements around it. Anything from generic employee numbers and access via LDAPs and how the things are called, until the detailed access to your transactions in your ERP systems. Mapping that out can give you valuable insight. We do that by giving you these maps so you can do it yourself, or we can do it in a way where you help you to produce them. You can use them for access control, but also for transaction monitoring elements. It addresses what you don't know. The example that I give here has no white spots, which is quite interesting. Then most exercises, if you do it like this, in first iterations will show white spots because nobody knows, or people forgot in the past. You will find unknown risks in your process and outdated procedures, and by addressing those you will find options to optimize the process and also maybe automate parts of the process.
That's a great point, Hans, because so many of you have said to us in response to the question, so what's your joiners, movers, levers process? To say, I think HR deal with that, and invariably nobody quite has control of it. That's great.
Another one that we heard quite often is, can I have a meaningful picture of ... And then it is, yeah, the reason is because a manager or a stakeholder asked me for some information that is apparently available in IRC, but not in the standard way we want to present it to this person or persons. Well, for that reason, we have created a supporting kit to apply better visualization and reporting tools to IRC, making use of the tools that you have in your organization anyway for dashboards, management, reporting purposes, or whatever, the click views and the tableaus of this world. And we do that by giving you some advice and some guided workshops whereby we facilitate finding out what you need and how you can best pilot it to get it out of IRC. We have examples for the main tools I just mentioned, and it really can quickly give you a better satisfaction to the requirements of your stakeholders, better service, and a more efficient way of reporting and visualizing in hours and not in weeks, which is sometimes the case.
That's a great way of sort of refreshing the stakeholder experience very, very quickly and very, very cheaply as well. So they get a new way of, more appealing way of seeing these things. Thanks, Hans. So another topic that's very hot at the moment is, I talked at the beginning about the focus on controls, and that we used to have very kind of exclusively on controls, and now a much broader view of risk and policy, and the concept of enterprise risk, not just focusing on one particular discipline. So we can have a kind of a holistic view of risks that affect the organization. So enterprise risk management is definitely here to stay. There's a lot of work done on it. I'm sure most of the organizations on this call, you have ERM activities going on within the business. You want to make sure that what you're doing in controls monitoring with the IRC or with anything else is aligned with your enterprise risk management framework, because somebody's got to do it, and if you're not aligned, that's a first stage in some bunch of challenges. So the challenge always has been with risk management is risk management's always been regarded as a high-level sort of fluffy activity about defining risk, assessing risk, and then working out how you're doing against it through attestation or judgment. And even the word monitoring is used a lot, but it doesn't mean what we mean in terms of Approva and IRC. And then, in the detail level, monitoring control exceptions, as you do with SOD and transaction monitoring and process insights. But there isn't really a close link. So we've done some work with a number of organizations to really link the thinking and the practice. On the left-hand side, there's a virtuous circle of risk management. So risks are the things that clearly the business is exposed to or can be exposed to, and we try to mitigate those by implementing business policies. And we have a whole bunch of policies, many of which are just assertions or statements or tone at the top kind of policies. And that some of those policies can be implemented by controls. And those controls, some of them are manual, hopefully many of them are automated, and those get implemented in your ERP systems and others. And the job of tools like IRC is to monitor those controls and make sure that they're set in the right way and any exceptions are flagged up that you can then remediate or take action on. But by looking at this whole cycle as a kind of holistic end-to-end process, it's fact to act. It's not fact to judgment or judgment to fact. It is, let's have a look at the risks all the way through, integrate the whole process. So on the left-hand side, that's a great way of helping to express to stakeholders how all of these disciplines interrelate. And also, we've done a bunch of work with some of the ERM technology vendors to produce physical integration. So you can take an ERM tool, MetroStream and Archer and OpenPages, and have an integration into your IRC approver environment, so the appropriate information is passed, and therefore stakeholders get a common single version of the truth view of risk, policy, and controls. And as you see on the right, the Pentagon that Hans referred to earlier, I'm going to talk a little bit more detail about that, but there's a framework for understanding how we do this. So it's a pretty important topic, and if you're not dealing with it now, if it's not a current challenge, it will be very soon, so you might want to think about that. We've published some work on this. Again, you can ask more about it. So these are the kind of things. We have some templates, we have some documents which we can help you with. We can share the approach, and if you've got a specific implementation problem, we can help you with that too. So the next piece is we've been very good at monitoring embedded controls in ERP systems, whether it's the security model through segregation duties and sensitive access, or whether it's the embedded controls through the process insights. But there are a bunch of controls, a surprising percentage of our financial controls are not embedded within our ERP systems, however much we'd like. There are elements of reporting of various financial and IT-related issues that need to get out to stakeholders around the world in business operations, and they need to attest that these things are correct. Not least, the user access piece, sending out an attestation to local managers. Are these people still employed? Do they still require access to the systems? So that's the user access attestation. Through to manual journal entries out to regional controllers. Are these manual journal entries above these limits? Are these valid? And have you signed them off? And the ability to attest to them. So there's a bunch of capabilities here, and we're seeing a lot more focus on that now. It may actually be a kind of an audit issue, kind of one of the audit themes for 2016, 2017. We've seen a lot of activity around this. So we can help you with, you can help yourself by assessing where these control attestation cycles exist. But we can also help you with looking at that and working out how you augment your IRC solution with sensible attestation. And you can deal with both IT general controls and process controls, and even entity level controls that way. So, Hans?
Yeah. And then there was BizRights and Approva. And do we have to upgrade to the newer versions? Do we really? Yeah, you have, because you must be sure that the technology that is underpinning IRC is still fully supported, that it is supporting browsers and other pieces of technology that are up to par with the latest security requirements. So for the technology reason, it is one reason to upgrade. Another reason is, of course, there are functional changes and improvements in the tool. Of course, you want to make sure that your user interface is looking modern enough so that it doesn't put off your users. What we deliver for you is anything from an upgrade rationale, where we give you input for your business case that you bring to management why you should upgrade, because business generally doesn't like upgrades if they're not necessary. What the best upgrade variant is, and what path you should take, taking all history or not. We do this in our safe passageway, meaning we can take away all the risk of doing the upgrade and all the work from you in a modular way. And while talking about the tool and the process around it, are you sure that it is functionally and technically used in a way that is optimized and using all the best practices and the lessons learned over the years from all of you? Look at your IRC alert dashboard, and if you see a lot of red things there, it's maybe time to go into health check mode. Look at both the tool and the process around it. depicted by a process map again, and see if you can't optimize quickly. We will do this health check. There's a lot of quick wins we see coming out of it. We can decide if you implement those optimization actions or we do it together. We will make sure that you get a fresh and optimized IRC implementation with the best possible throughput. Some activities around IRC are very specific. You could call them niche activities. Sometimes it's a part-time activity for a person. Every quarter they have to do something. Sometimes it is combined with other activities that require more attention. We have a modular approach for that, where we could discuss with you which activities are there. Anything from putting content into IRC, new rules and rule books, up to supporting your underlying servers, but also helping you with the remediation process for actual violations. The modular approach is we look to what activities you are performing now. Is that the best way for you to source them? And are alternative sourcing scenarios possible where we are flexible? Anything from SLA, on demand, or periodic sourcing can be discussed. And if it has a good cost-benefit ratio, it could be very worthwhile to optimize your operation.
Thanks very much, Hans. I would just remind you, do ask questions in the panel on the thing. So whether there's challenges we haven't addressed yet and you think we might not get there, get it in now. Or if there's questions about what we expressed already, get them in, because get it while it's hot. So extending controls monitoring beyond core ERP. Now when Approva first started, there was a lot of discussion about one of the wonders of Approva. It would support multiple applications and allow you to do cross-application control monitoring, which was very true, and some organizations did that. But many organizations stuck to the core ERP because they felt that ran all the business processes. What's interesting was these tectonic shifts of technology that are going on now is more and more organizations see the ERP just as the core hub of the master data and some essential transactions. And around it they see spokes of other critical applications, such as the suites that run certain end-to-end processes, very specific industry components. And so what we're seeing is an uptick in interest in how do I monitor controls, not just in my core, PeopleSoft, SAP, Oracle, whatever, but how do I actually monitor across an end-to-end process which covers multiple systems, which kind of relates to the global process ownership discussion. So if you've got global process owners in your organization, you can guarantee they're going to be looking at the process and all of the systems that serve it. So we're doing a lot of work now connecting non-core systems or satellite systems to IRC Approva, whether it's the P2P suites from Coupa and Ariba, or other BPC solutions, other components, not just departmental, but as I say, industry-specific applications which have relevant controls. So this is now a well-tested approach. So if that's something coming up, the great thing is there's a all that technology exists within IRC. You don't have to go out to a third party. Another point I want to cover is user access provisioning. This is an interesting topic, and the access provisioning in Access Manager of IRC or Approva. So I guess here's the grubby little secret. Most of the GRC tools, the user access provisioning in them, whether it's from the ERP vendor or Approva, the user access provisioning tools are pretty clunky. They're designed for people who really understand the essence and the content of the ERP system, what the role and responsibility structures look like, how to interpret the terms. So to implement them well, organizations have had to have help desks and centers of excellence who understand everything. So they kind of they decentralize the process a bit. What's really coming to the fore now is in the need to drive efficiency, effectiveness, and a simplified end-to-end process for providing joiner, mover, lever control. We're putting in place some really easy to use portal front ends where any end user can request additional access they need in business terms without having to know the names of roles or responsibilities. Request them, go through the approval cycle which is embedded in Approva IRC, deal with the SOD and sensitive access checks, and provision them into the ERP, but in a way that means the central help desk only need to deal with complex technical issues. They don't need to do the work. Now, organizations are saving substantial effort in their help desk, being able to redeploy them to more valuable things. So if that's an issue, if you've got SAP security or Oracle security people, valuable people in your help desks doing work which is really just doing provisioning administrative work, you want to think about how to change that. It's pretty simple to do. We've got some great examples. So you could do it yourself if you wanted to build a portal, but we've kind of cracked most of the challenges, so it's worth talking to us if that's an issue for you. So we said we'd cover 15 specific recommendations, and we have covered 15 specific recommendations. Actually, I think we covered 14. But anyway, the point about that is, think about those. If you want the materials, ask us for the materials. If any one of those is interesting to you, you're going to want more detail. That isn't enough to do anything. But every one of those has some backup materials, so let us know. Now, if those 15 do not crack your issue, let us know what your issues are. We know there's some more. There's a limit to the amount of time, but we want to be able to help because we know it can be a struggle sometimes dealing with these challenges. So that's the situation. So I want to just give you a quick level set on the state of Approva IRC. This isn't meant to be a big roadmap update, but just so you know what's what. So the hands the floor.
Yes, but first 20 seconds of rest, because Dan and I have been blabbermouthing away quite hefty on all the potentials for improvement. And if you need a bit of rest, then best is to put up a Dilbert cartoon. And I picked this one because it is a nice introduction to thinking about software again. And in this case, the cartoon is saying that all the hassle of getting the newest software and hardware in there resulted in just somebody being able to see a nice cat picture.
You're obviously not talking about Approva, though, are you, Hans?
No, no, that will be a cats and dogs discussion. Okay, hail to the marketeers. The naming of what is now called Infor Risk and Compliance has changed quite dramatically over time. And in talking to our long-time customers, I think the word BizRights and Approva come as often to the table as IRC is called now, which is, of course, the evidence on the gray arrow that Consider has been there from the beginning and up till the latest version and the versions to come. So don't worry about the naming. We are flexible in using that. I want to go very, very briefly in a few slides to what Infor Risk and Compliance does. Maybe because you don't know, because you came relatively new to the topic, or you forgot, or you think of extending the footprint of what IRC can do for you. Essentially, IRC is managing questions about what you can do and what you did do around applications, the configuration of those applications, the transactions, and the master data that you use for those transactions. You do that for multiple stakeholders depicted at the top, and you get your data from a multitude of systems and applications, anything from the standard big ERPs to the feeder systems around it, as Dan earlier described. And you look upon those via a whole bunch of specific insights, allowing you anything from financial control to attestation. It's a 360-degree view, so it is very important that you do the fact-finding, do the analysis, but also include the action workflow to make sure that you address what you find, and that you, if you find a root cause for it, make sure that the next iteration is better than the last. The various functional components of IRC address these can-do and did-do elements, and I have to, of course, mention Certification Manager if you want to do certification and attestation on what you did do. Is there a big difference between 6 and 10? Well, hopefully not, because it was addressing the world of controls monitoring quite well. So hopefully that managing of that world is still there. But yes, there are many differences in the way it is presented, the way you use it, the way it talks to the newer technology, etc. This is not a webinar around IRC in detail. If you want to find out more, look on our website. There is a recorded webcast which is called Keeping on Track with IRC 10, which you can find on our events page. You'll find much more details there. I just, in the 2 slides, which you will get in your handout, listed the main differences between the 6 and the 10 series. The next version of Infor Risk Compliance is always around the corner. There is a nice roadmap for that. It both addresses new functionality, a lot of functionality, by the way, that you've requested for. The majority of the changes in new versions are based on enhancement requests that you've put in yourself or that we put in on your behalf. Of course, it wants to keep up with the connectivity of the major ERP solutions. For instance, S/4HANA support is available since the beginning of this year, and various SAP on HANA modules already since 2 years ago. And we will follow newer developments like Oracle and Infor Cloud suites. Technology stack shouldn't be forgotten. Databases are moving on, browsers are moving on, and the newer versions of IRC support the latest browsers and database versions very well. Are you the first one? If you go, no, probably you are in the last quarter of the community that will move to IRC 10 if you haven't done so. 75% have already been migrated, of which some are the largest implementations in the world. There are some quotes about how the daily results are seen by the organizations. I mentioned them here. I think improvement in performance is one of the main topics that comes back all the time, and the fact that it supports the latest ERP versions that are implemented with our customers is an important quote that the customers gave.
Thanks, Hans. That's a good recap on where we are with Approva IRC. So we've talked you through the 4 big themes and the 15 suggestions. So let's talk about how you get a deeper dive. Now, those are the 15 suggestions. Now, remember, any one of those that's relevant. I assume 1, 2, or 3 of those are relevant to everybody. Please send us, what more information do you want? We've got some backup for those things. If those 15 aren't your issue, send us an email or contact us through this to tell us what your issue is. So you have no choice but to send a note to say, I want more information on A, B, or C, or you missed the point, my number 16 is what really matters. And so we'll be taking names, so please deal with that. What I would say at a minimum is GRC framework, which Hans referred to. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes on it. Do get that going, because a lot of the issues that many of you have referred to are really related to stakeholder alignment. And are our stakeholders getting what they now believe they should be getting rather than what they initially believe they should be getting? So it's an initial 360-degree assessment. You can do it yourself. You don't need to use any expert help. We can help if you want us to, but touch on all the stakeholders and people, not just the stakeholders you have today, but the stakeholders that maybe you're missing out. So that's that, and then revisit those value-creating ideas, which is the 15 big recommendations. So the framework, this is really important. We've referred to the Pentagon a few times. This is a very powerful way of getting stakeholders, working out who the stakeholders should be, aligning them around what outcomes they want and need, and making sure you have a systematic way of going through how to deliver those outcomes, how to measure your success, and how to make sure you got stakeholder satisfaction. So these 9 themes are, what's the outcome? What outcome do you expect? Now you might think, and I used to think this, that if you're doing SOX compliance, the outcome's obvious. We just want to be SOX compliant. Well, sadly, it's not quite as obvious as that, and you need to work out, you need to have a discussion, and it ends up being a debate about what is it we ultimately want from this. Is it just about SOX compliance, or is it about good governance? How do we identify the stakeholders? We've got a set of stakeholders today. Some of them might be a bit jaded. Some of them may have changed. You might have a new controller. Do they have any idea why you started doing this? So the whole issue about what do you do when stakeholders change and how do you make sure your stakeholders are getting what they need from your program. Measuring and communicating progress is one of the biggest issues. You can't do this properly if you haven't done the first two, but you've got to be able to define what good looks like and have a mechanism of KPIs that says this is how we're doing, this is how we're performing, this is how we're progressing. And that progress doesn't go straight up as a straight line. It's lumps and bumps on the way. But the general approach is important to communicate. You need to understand what happens when the bumps in the business occur. You need to work out how is the program organization led, operated, and governed, because this is a program and a set of processes. It's not just a one-off project, which again is another point where many of people have struggled, assuming that implementing their tool as a project will solve their problem, when actually you're implementing, you have a program and you're implementing new processes that didn't really exist before, which leads us to process design. What is our end-to-end process? Where does it sit? How do we manage exceptions? How do we report against it? So process placement, sourcing, and operation. Well, it doesn't all sit in head office. There's some general first line of defense activities out in the field. So there's people in operations actually executing processes and controls. There is the management of the process, maybe centrally or regionally. What's the role of shared services? What's the role of geographic management? And what's the role of audit? All of these things, where do different parts of the process sit? You may outsource some of it. And of course, you've got technology to worry about. Yes, IRC or any other tool, and the ERPs and the other components, and your pieces of RPA technology, which integrate things. That's all important, but it's only one of 9 things. Do we have the skills and capability to manage this? And if we deliver this as a service to our business on an ongoing basis, how do we know that our stakeholders and participants are getting what they need from it, and how do we validate changing demand? This is a critical thing. You can use these 9 bullet points with little breakdown questions, run a workshop in a couple of hours, and get real alignment and understanding amongst stakeholders, which will make your life a lot easier in terms of setting priorities and working out what you need to be doing. So again, there's more material there if you want it, and I do recommend, of all the things, you do that. So that's fine. Then we've shared some insights on some of the areas we're working on and the 15 recommendations. We're also working a lot of other topics which are in the works, and we're right now currently working on either as thought leadership or as research processes. So what is the impact of robotics, for example, in business processes and as controls? That's RPA, not industrial robots, although that's an equally interesting question. What's the role of robotics and RPA in continuous controls monitoring? Are there elements where you might want to apply some robotics to that? Now, hopefully, the tools you're using mean you don't need to do too much of that, but you need to think about it. AI is a massive topic right now, AI and machine learning. How do we assure an AI-enabled process? That isn't easy if you haven't got a rules-based definition of what the process is. So what's the mechanism of that? A lot of focus on blockchain, not just in financial services now, but as trusted contracts for source to pay. What does risk control and assurance look like in a blockchain environment? People are very blithely talking about a trusted environment with blockchain. Well, it's all very well when the assets are digital, but there's something that the academics call an interface to reality, which is when you actually have a physical thing, somebody's got to enter some data somewhere, and if they enter it wrong, you've got garbage in, garbage out. Doesn't matter what underlying technology. So there's a whole risk and control assurance topic on that we're researching. Detection versus prevention. In the early days of SOX, it was all about preventive controls. Don't worry about detective, because there was a belief that somehow you could prevent everything bad happening. Well, clearly we've demonstrated that is not true, philosophically or practically. So there's a balance between detection and prevention. There's a lot of discussion around it, and a lot more people are now interested in how do I catch issues as we execute rather than get into prevention. And then, of course, the regulator perspectives, the PCAOB are starting to think about AI and blockchain, all this sort of stuff. How does it affect your SOX compliance or any other sort of compliance? Anyway, those are topics. If you've got other topics you want us to weigh in on, or you're interested in any of those, do let us know. But as a matter of conclusion, we've shared a lot of information with you. I know it's at a high level, but you, as I say, need to ask for the detail. You could just say, no, that's very interesting, but if we have a meeting, something better may happen, and we all know what happens with that. We have to nail these things shut. So thank you very much. We have a bunch of questions. Keep asking them, and if you haven't can't enter them into the panel anymore, send them to Emma and we'll get back to you directly. We've got time for a couple of them. You know, you've got a lot of questions here about your themes that you want to get into. A couple of specific questions. Right, specific question. There is a loss of interest in the compliance work we are doing with Approva. What do we do? Well, that's an interesting point. I would suggest you get into that governance framework. The stakeholders you have and the stakeholders you think you should have, you probably want to work out what outcomes they're expecting. Without doubt, they've changed since you started, and maybe they don't even understand what it is you're doing. But if you want some advice about how to apply that, that's probably the first place to start. But it's definitely see over time that people are changing expectations of what they want from you. And maybe they're also changing expectations in how you deliver the results. Another quick question. We're moving to SAP HANA. How do we transition to the related SAP GRC tools? Okay, interesting. Hans, you want to talk to that?
Yeah, well, you have options to go for other tools, but you have also the option to stay with IRC because it is supporting S/4HANA. I think you should have a good thought about the process that you have now versus the technology that you have now, and if the process and all the other segments in the Pentagon will not change using S/4HANA, and your technology as you're using today is fine IRC, you can stay on that. So take again a holistic view on the topic and then decide what to do. Just changing the tool probably will not help you if the process is remaining the same, or if the process has to change and the technology still can support it that you have in-house, it's a cheaper solution than starting all over again.
You probably want to do a risk review anyway as you change it. But,
yeah.
okay, thank you very much. We have a bunch of other questions. We are up to our hour. Thank you very much for your time and attention. We're going to respond to you on all the questions you've asked. Keep asking them. You've got Emma's email here. She will make sure the right expert in the organization deals with the question, and we're going to get back to you. So one of those 15 recommendations has got to be relevant to you. Ask for more information. If those 15 aren't right, tell us what your issues are. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I hope you found it useful. Have a good rest of your day. Thank you.